I'm Mark 42 and the HOA fined me $150 for unauthorized pool equipment, referring to my deaf daughter's waterproof hearing aids. It happened on a Saturday. The sun was high, the pool was crowded, and my daughter Ellie, age 10, was doing what she loved most, swimming laps. Her coach said she had natural talent. She was focused, powerful for her age, and happiest in water. That day, Ellie wore her bright blue waterproof hearing aids, the ones she was so proud of. She'd saved up for months helping neighbors with chores just to get them. She loved how they matched her swimsuit. I watched her from a bench near the shallow end, sipping coffee and feeling something close to peace. Then came the laughter. 3 board members sat at the corner table under a striped HOA umbrella, sipping sodas and whispering behind their sunglasses. I didn't think much of it until I saw one of them, a tall, sun-leathered woman named Cynthia, the HOA secretary, cup her hands around her ears, mockingly turning her head back and forth like a cartoonish robot. Another board member leaned in, squinting at Ellie. Looks like she's got pool antennas? Maybe she's picking up dolphin frequencies. He said loud enough for the surrounding kids to hear. A few teenagers laughed. Ellie stopped swimming. I saw her tread water, then touch her ears. She looked around confused. Then she locked eyes with me, and I knew she'd heard it. I stood up, walked over to the board members, and asked in the calmest voice I could muster, "Is there a problem with my daughter's hearing aids?" Cynthia smiled, not apologetically smugly. "We just think the pool should remain free of enhancements. It's about aesthetics. This neighborhood deserves better than your taste." That sentence hit harder than a slap, not just for what it said, but how casually cruel it was. I didn't respond. I nodded once and walked back to my seat, trying to keep my jaw unclenched. Ellie climbed out of the pool. Her coach tried to console her, but she grabbed a towel, sat beside me, and stayed silent the rest of the afternoon. That night, I paid the absurd $150 fine that arrived via email, citing unauthorized accessories under an obscure HOA clause no one had enforced before. But I had something Cynthia didn't: patience and a very long memory. But before I tell you what happened on that day, let me explain how it all began. When we moved into the neighborhood, I wasn't looking for much. Just peace, maybe a little quiet. After my wife passed 3 years ago, Ellie and I were broken in ways I didn't even understand yet. She was 7 at the time, and the house we lived in back then held too many echoes of her laughter and my wife's absence. We needed a reset, a place where Ellie could be a kid again without constantly feeling the shadows in the room. This neighborhood seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, a decent school district, a public pool maintained by the HOA. The kind of place where neighbors waved during morning walks and hung little flags on their mailboxes in July. Our new home was a modest 2-story painted soft gray with white trim. Nothing fancy, but Ellie loved the backyard, and I loved the fact that it had a good lock on the front gate. The HOA president at the time was a man named Gary, who introduced himself the day we moved in. Friendly enough, he handed me a welcome packet, smiled, and said, "We keep things tidy around here, but it's all in the name of community." At first, everything felt calm. For the first time in a long time, Ellie slept through the night. She started riding her bike around the cul-de-sac. She joined a local swim club. Her hearing aids, a pink pair at the time, helped her stay connected, especially in school. Her coach Maria worked with her tirelessly, learning basic ASL just to communicate better. That small gesture meant the world to Ellie. She started smiling again. I kept to myself mostly. I worked from home, contract data analyst stuff, spreadsheets, trend tracking, risk assessments. Boring to most, but it gave me stability and control. 2 things I had lost in the years after my wife's death. Cynthia didn't become a problem right away. In fact, I didn't even know her name until about 6 months after we moved in. She had this way of watching people, especially people who didn't quite fit into her pristine vision of the neighborhood. People like the Bennetts across the street who planted sunflowers instead of roses. Or old Mr. DeLuca, who parked his classic car in his driveway instead of the garage. She called them aesthetic disruptions. I heard that phrase more than once at HOA meetings. I didn't attend many, but the one I did, it was like a Stepford gathering. Lots of nodding, little dissent. Cynthia wasn't the president, but she may as well have been. She had the real power. At one point during that meeting, someone asked whether the pool could allow specific disability-friendly additions like adaptive rails or softer lighting for sensory-sensitive kids. Cynthia tilted her head and said, "We wouldn't want the place to start looking like a therapy center, would we?" Laughter. Awkward, low laughter, but it was there. I never forgot that. Ellie got her waterproof hearing aids the following summer. Bright blue, designed for kids who loved water. They were her badge of courage. She swam stronger with them, listened better during drills, and even made two new friends who asked her questions about them, not out of pity, but curiosity. That's what childhood should be, I thought. But with Cynthia and the board, things started to turn. Small things at first. Passive-aggressive notes left in my mailbox about Ellie's noisy toy, her basketball. A warning letter when she chalked drawings on the sidewalk. They even cited me for leaving our garbage bin out past pickup by 12 minutes. 12. Still, I tried to play nice. I told myself it was the price of living in a tightly managed neighborhood. And I didn't want Ellie to feel the tension. She deserved normal. After all she'd been through, losing her mother, switching schools, learning to navigate a world that didn't always make space for her, I couldn't bear to let her joy be touched by adult cruelty. But looking back, I see now how it was all part of a pattern. Cynthia and her crew didn't like anything that made their version of the neighborhood look messy or different. Ellie was different, and that made her a target. There was one day that sticks out. A hot Thursday afternoon. Ellie was doing butterfly strokes, her coach cheering her on. She climbed out of the pool, panting, grinning ear to ear. Cynthia walked by, paused, and said in a sugary voice, "You should make sure those things don't rust in the chlorine." She didn't even look at Ellie when she said it. That night, Ellie asked me if she could wear a swim cap to cover the blue. I asked why. She just shrugged. It makes them less mad. Something twisted inside me then. I hugged her tight and said, "We don't hide who we are." But I could feel it. The change in her. The little flicker of self-doubt. The seed of shame they were planting. I should have acted then, but I still believed in civility and diplomacy. I thought maybe if I showed them respect, they'd offer it back. I was wrong. It didn't take long after that for the HOA to escalate. The week after Ellie asked about hiding her hearing aids, we received another notice this time about non-compliant attire at the pool. It listed Ellie's swim cap and hearing aids along with a vague reference to visually distracting accessories that conflict with community standards. Community standards. I stared at the notice like it had come from another planet. It was printed in bold Arial font, sealed with the HOA logo at the top, a little mock colonial house flanked by two cartoon trees. Beneath it was Cynthia's signature. I didn't say anything to Ellie. She'd had a good day at school, and I wasn't about to ruin it. I filed the notice away in my drawer and began checking the bylaws, all 73 pages of them. There was nothing about hearing aids, nothing about medical equipment or personal assistive devices. In fact, there was a clause that specifically exempted medical devices from uniformity regulations. But that wasn't the point. Cynthia wasn't trying to enforce a rule. She was creating a new one, targeted, arbitrary, and cruel. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw how calculated it was. At the pool, board members would monitor families. They always seemed to sit near the same people: the single mom with the autistic son who flapped his hands when he got excited, the quiet couple with the tattooed arms, the retired vet with the service dog. Anyone who didn't fit the magazine cover vision of pleasant suburbia. Ellie didn't want to go to the pool anymore. At first she said it was just too hot. Then she said she was tired. Then she stopped saying anything at all. I asked her one night gently, "Did something happen, sweetheart?" She hesitated. Then she said, "They laugh when I dive in. They think I can't hear it." I had no words, just rage, quiet, simmering rage. But the final push came the day of the poolside cookout. It was the HOA's big summer event, burgers, music, the whole block invited. Ellie didn't want to go. I almost didn't either, but I thought maybe if we showed up, smiled, played the game, they'd back off. Maybe I could talk to someone on the board one-on-one, explain how Ellie was feeling, appeal to decency. I was wrong. The sun was just beginning to set when we arrived. Ellie wore her blue hearing aids, no swim cap. I told her how proud I was. She gave me a half smile. Music played through a rented speaker system. Kids ran around with popsicles, and I thought for a second that maybe it would be okay. Then Cynthia walked over to the mic. "Let's hear it for all our swimmers this year," she said, clapping. "Especially the ones who come fully equipped." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. A few chuckles from the board table. Then one of the other board members, Russell, an old insurance guy with the personality of dry toast, stepped up behind her and with a crooked grin added, "Hey, if she starts picking up radio stations, maybe she can DJ next time." Laughter. Not a lot, but enough. Ellie froze. I turned just in time to see her lower her head and walk toward the gate. I didn't follow her right away. I was stunned, angry, too angry to think straight. But I didn't make a scene. That's what they expected. That's what would have given them power. I took a breath, then another. I looked around, and what I saw gave me a flicker of hope, the small kind that stirs in your chest when the tide starts to shift. A few neighbors weren't laughing. In fact, some looked appalled. One woman whispered something to her husband and shook her head. A teenage boy, one of the lifeguards, glared at Cynthia with open disgust. That's when it clicked. They weren't untouchable. They were just loud and organized. But they were outnumbered. They just didn't know it yet. I left the cookout without another word. Found Ellie at home in her room, curled up under her blanket, earbuds in her tablet glowing. I didn't say anything. I just sat next to her until she took one earbud out. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. She didn't say anything back, but she reached out and held my hand. That was the moment, the hinge, the quiet break inside me. That's when I decided I wouldn't ask them to change. I'd remove them. The day after the cookout, I called Ellie's coach, Maria. She'd seen what happened, had been standing just a few feet from the mic when Russell made his little radio joke. I didn't need to explain much. Maria had a younger brother with Down syndrome and a quiet fire in her belly that I'd always respected. What they did, she said on the phone, voice low but firm, was disgusting. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I think it's time they answer for it. I spent the next few days doing what I do best, observing, collecting, analyzing. But in the meantime, the damage at home was growing. Ellie had stopped wearing her hearing aids altogether, not just in the pool. She said they made her feel alien. I tried every way I could to explain how strong and beautiful she was, how her hearing aids weren't a flaw, they were a miracle. But kids don't always hear that, especially not when adults around them are mocking what makes them different. She started getting lower grades in school. Teachers emailed to say she seemed distracted, wasn't responding in class. I knew why. One night I found her in the upstairs bathroom door, slightly cracked, crying softly into her towel. I stepped in and froze. Her hearing aids were sitting on the counter. She was holding one with trembling fingers and whispering, "I wish I didn't need you." I didn't interrupt her. I stood there in the doorway, something inside me breaking apart and reforming into something sharper. I had allowed this to go on too long. And Cynthia wasn't just a bully. She was a virus infecting the entire structure of the HOA, using her influence to shape policies that punished people for not conforming. I took a sick day from work. Then two. I spent every hour reviewing HOA documents, board meeting recordings, old newsletters, and community emails. I logged every fine I'd received since moving in 9 total. I reviewed every complaint I could get access to, and a pattern emerged. People with aesthetic violations often had something else in common. They were different. A child with autism, a black family who painted their shutters blue, a gay couple who landscaped with succulents instead of grass. I even found a scanned copy of a complaint Cynthia filed last year against a family for hosting a birthday party with excessive decorations. I remembered that party. It had a superhero theme for a boy in a wheelchair. That's when the plan began to take shape. But even as I worked, things at home kept slipping. Ellie stopped going to swim practice. Maria texted me often, but I had to keep my replies vague. I was spiraling between fury and fear. Then came the final straw. A letter registered mail from the HOA citing us for habitual disruption of community norms. This one was different. This one hinted that further violations could result in a board hearing and possible suspension of pool access privileges. That was it. They were trying to ban Ellie. I sat down in my home office and stared at the letter. Then I opened a blank spreadsheet and started a new project, Operation Recall. I created a list of every neighbor who had ever received a fine. Then I started cross-referencing their infractions with what I had observed and documented. I color-coded it all. A pattern emerged, crisp and undeniable. Then I installed discrete cameras near the pool fence and one across from the HOA clubhouse, mounted under the shade of a tree on my own property line. What I caught over the next 2 weeks was worse than I expected. Snide comments, mockery. Cynthia casually discussing problem homes with Russell while sipping from a Yeti tumbler. One board member referring to Ellie as the little sonar fish. And one clip, one moment that made everything snap into focus. Cynthia said, laughing, "I mean, it's not my fault the kid needs accessories. But maybe she belongs in a private facility, not here." That was the moment, the line, the one I knew would wake people up. Still, I needed more than footage. I needed numbers, support. I printed out forms, petition signatures required for a board recall. 60% of the neighborhood needed to sign. It sounded impossible, but I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, and I wasn't alone. The next evening, I walked across the street to the Bennetts. I showed them what I'd collected. At first, they were stunned. Then they got angry. Then they said, "What do you need?" By the end of the week, I had 5 allies. By the end of the month, I had 20. And Cynthia still didn't see it coming. Enough was enough. It was a Saturday morning when I laid everything out across my dining table. The timeline, the video evidence, the signed complaints, the recall paperwork. Coffee in one hand, highlighter in the other, I went line by line, connecting every dot between Cynthia's petty cruelty and the culture of exclusion she'd cultivated. By now, I had 43 signatures. 43 people who had experienced the same quiet tyranny, the same thinly veiled contempt for anything outside the perfect HOA aesthetic. But I still needed more. I set out block by block, knocking on doors with a small binder under my arm and a practice sentence ready in my head. "I'm collecting support for a full recall of the HOA board. I'd like to show you why." I kept it short. I didn't try to sell them. I just flipped open the binder to a printout of Cynthia's exact words. "Maybe she belongs in a private facility, not here." Then I'd show them the video. Every single person I showed that clip to signed. One man, Ron, former Marine, walked with a cane, signed with trembling hands. "My grandson has cochlear implants," he said. "That woman disgusts me." Mrs. DeLuca, whose husband had received 3 citations for planting basil instead of begonias, signed without blinking. "It was always about control," she muttered. "We just didn't have the proof." Ellie didn't know the full extent of what I was doing. I kept her shielded from most of it. But one night as I was taping a recall poster to the bulletin board at the clubhouse, she surprised me by asking, "Are you going to fix it?" I turned to her and said, "I'm going to try." She smiled. It wasn't the old smile, not quite, but it was getting closer. A few days later, I submitted the official recall request with 62% of the neighborhood signed on. More than enough. The board now had 2 options: resign or face an emergency vote. They chose to fight, and that was their mistake. They tried to paint me as unhinged, sent out a newsletter calling my footage out of context recordings, and accused me of manipulating the community with a personal vendetta. But people weren't buying it anymore, not after what they'd seen. The newsletter backfired spectacularly. It prompted even more neighbors to reach out to me privately, asking if they could help. People who had never spoken up before, the quiet ones, the introverts, the ones Cynthia assumed would stay silent forever, were suddenly paying attention. We planned the emergency meeting like a trial. I had a projector, ready speakers in place, printouts for every chair. Ellie stayed home with Maria, who offered to babysit. She knew what the meeting meant. I walked into the community hall with 2 USB drives in my pocket and my notes organized like a prosecutor. The board sat in a row of folding chairs at the front, flanked by 2 HOA attorneys, both of whom looked increasingly uncomfortable as the seats filled. I began with a simple line. "My name is Mark Bell. I moved here 3 years ago with my daughter. I want you to see what she's been living with." Then I hit play. The silence was deafening. When Cynthia's voice rang out that smug, sharp-edged line about Ellie belonging in a private facility, someone in the audience gasped. A man near the back stood up and said loudly, "Are you serious? She said that about a child." I let the clips run, one after another, subtle insults, eye rolls, the mocking mimicry of Ellie's voice. Then I laid out the fines patterns and who received them, the way they disproportionately affected families with visible differences. When I finished, I looked straight at Cynthia. "You didn't just enforce rules. You created a system to punish people who didn't look or live the way you wanted." She tried to respond, but the attorney leaned over and whispered something. Her mouth snapped shut. I turned to the crowd. "This is not just about me or Ellie. This is about how power works when good people stay quiet. But not anymore." And then I sat down. Applause, not thunderous but steady, like a gathering storm. The vote was scheduled for the following week. The board had 7 days to prepare. I went home and tucked Ellie in. She looked up at me and whispered, "Did you show them?" I nodded. "Yeah, kiddo, I showed them everything. 7 days." That's how long Cynthia and her cronies had to scramble. And scramble they did. Flyers showed up taped to mailboxes warning of an unstable neighbor trying to hijack our community. An anonymous email blast claimed I had doctored the footage. Someone, I'm assuming Russell, even tried to file a motion to postpone the vote, citing legal uncertainties. But the neighborhood had already shifted. That projector didn't just show people the truth, it cracked something open. People started talking, really talking. Front lawns turned into meeting grounds. The couple on Magnolia Lane who never used to speak to anyone were suddenly hosting informal Q&As on their driveway. I passed 3 different block meetings in one afternoon. They didn't call it a mutiny, but that's what it was. I received over 20 emails in 3 days. Neighbors asking for more details. Volunteers offering to drive elderly residents to the vote. Teenagers offering to babysit so parents could attend. One woman offered to print signs, and another created a website titled Take Back Our HOA. I didn't do any of that. I just lit the match. It burned faster than I expected. But I also knew Cynthia wasn't going down quietly. She started smearing not just me, but Ellie, whispering to sympathetic ears that perhaps our situation wasn't healthy, that maybe a single dad wasn't equipped to parent a special needs child alone. She even sent a formal letter to the school district accusing Ellie's swim coach Maria of inappropriate involvement with a student's family. That one hit hard. Maria was livid. She nearly quit. But I talked her down, reminded her that we were close, so close, and that this kind of last-minute sabotage only proved how desperate Cynthia had become. I could tell Maria wanted to swing back hard, but she did something better. She posted a public video. She stood in front of the swim club banner and calmly, firmly told her side. She shared what she'd seen, how Ellie had suffered, and how the board had retaliated against her for doing the right thing. She didn't rant, she didn't accuse, she told the truth. That video hit 2,000 views in a weekend, pretty impressive for a neighborhood with only 300 homes. And the tide, it became a flood. By the morning of the vote, I woke up to 3 words written in sidewalk chalk across our driveway. We've got you. Ellie saw it from her bedroom window. She just smiled. The vote was held in the same community hall as the hearing, but this time it was standing room only. People filled the back wall, leaned against door frames, even spilled out onto the sidewalk. Cynthia stood at the front wearing a pearl necklace and a forced smile. I sat near the middle. The process was simple, one by one. Every registered household placed a ballot into a locked box. Yes to recall, no to keep the board. It took an hour, but the count took 5 minutes. The final tally, 83% voted yes. The board was done, effective immediately. Cynthia didn't make a speech. She didn't argue. She stood up, gathered her notes, and walked out, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a distant, irrelevant memory. Russell followed her. So did the others. No applause this time, just silence. And then someone, maybe Ron, whispered, "Finally." And just like that, it was over. A new board was elected within the week. Not perfect people, not heroes, just neighbors who cared. Maria was nominated as president. She almost refused, but Ellie hugged her and said, "You should do it." So she did, and I finally exhaled. It had been over a year since we moved here. I had buried myself in patience and quiet until there was no room left for either. But now the house felt light again. The weight had shifted. The fight was over. And Ellie, she put her hearing aids on the next morning without hesitation. She packed her swim bag. And when I drove her to practice, she rolled the window down and waved at every house we passed. The revenge, though rooted in justice, wasn't just about removing bad actors. It was about reclaiming our space, our home, our peace. But revenge done right has layers, and I wasn't done yet. See, Cynthia may have lost her title, but her influence lingered in little places, in policy, in attitude, in the tiny rules she had planted, like landmines across the HOA charter. So while the new board settled in, I offered to help, quietly behind the scenes. Maria didn't ask for it, but she welcomed the offer. She knew I had a head for the fine print, and now I had a reason to use it. I started reviewing every bylaw, every clause, every amendment passed during Cynthia's tenure. It was a rabbit hole of absurdity. There was a rule banning flags over a certain size clearly aimed at the veteran family on Birch Street, a limit on front porch decorations added right after a Muslim family moved in and placed a welcome lantern outside, even a policy restricting non-traditional yard furnishings, which seemed harmless until you realized it targeted kids with sensory swings and adapted outdoor toys. It wasn't random, it was systemic pettiness dressed in bureaucracy, so I proposed changes. Little by little, I helped write up the new inclusivity amendment banning discriminatory enforcement of aesthetic rules. I submitted a motion to formally recognize assistive devices of any kind as protected under HOA guidelines. And perhaps most satisfying, I drafted a resolution to name the neighborhood's small garden circle, the one Cynthia once called a visual eyesore after Ellie. We called it Ellie's Circle. The plaque read, "In honor of every child who sees the world differently and helps us see it better." The board approved it unanimously. Ellie didn't say much when we took her to see it. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters and smiled. Then she said, "Can we plant lavender here?" We did. And the neighbors came. The Bennetts brought seedlings. The DeLucas donated a bench. Even old Mr. Harrison, who once received a citation for wind chimes, offered to install a handmade arbor. The space became something bigger than just flowers and shrubs. It became a reminder that this community could choose kindness. But there was one more layer to the setup. You remember the footage I'd collected? I'd kept it locked away after the vote. I hadn't shared it beyond the meeting. But now that the board was gone, I wanted it to matter in a bigger way. So I reached out to a local advocacy group. They specialized in supporting families with children who had disabilities. I shared Ellie's story in the recordings and asked if they'd be interested in using it for educational material. They said yes, enthusiastically. Within weeks, the story became part of a training seminar for HOAs across the state. A cautionary tale about implicit bias and the power of community accountability. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It spread quietly, the way truth often does. And through all of it, Ellie came back to life. She started drawing again, swimming again. She asked if she could join Maria in teaching younger kids how to swim, especially kids who had disabilities like hers. That was her idea. So we made it happen. The public twist didn't come from me, it came from Ellie. And it was perfect. A few weeks after the Garden Circle was named in her honor, the community newsletter announced its annual Neighborhood Spotlight feature, a tradition Cynthia had started ironically as a way to praise residents who upheld HOA standards. It had always been used to prop up people who kept their lawns trimmed like pudding greens and followed every rule like it was the Constitution. This time, the board asked for nominations. I didn't think much of it until Ellie handed me a folded piece of paper one evening after dinner. "Can you drop this off at the clubhouse for me?" she asked. Inside was her nomination form, but she hadn't nominated herself. She'd nominated Maria. It was short, handwritten in blue pen, but it stopped me in my tracks. "Maria taught me how to swim without fear and how to hear the world even when people try to shut you out. She's the best person in this neighborhood. Also, she makes really good cookies." I delivered it the next morning, smiling the whole way. Maria won, unanimously. The newsletter printed her photo on the front cover, arms crossed, standing proud by the pool where it had all started. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came during the award ceremony. The HOA hosted a small gathering at the clubhouse, nothing grand, lemonade, cookies, and folding chairs, but it was packed. Ellie sat in the front row. When Maria took the mic, she looked straight at Cynthia, who to my surprise had shown up. Maybe to save face, maybe to sulk, maybe because some people can't bear to not be at the center of something even when they're not wanted. Maria smiled, not smugly, kindly. Then she said, "I've learned that leading isn't about telling people what to do. It's about showing them who they can be." Ellie taught me that. She reminded me that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it swims with bright blue hearing aids and keeps showing up even when the world tries to push it down. A beat of silence. Then applause. Real applause. Ellie blushed so hard I thought she might melt into her chair. But she was glowing. Afterward, people came up to her. Adults, kids. One woman knelt beside her and said her son had just gotten hearing aids too and asked if Ellie would mind talking to him sometime. Ellie said, "Sure, can we go swimming?" And just like that, she'd become something Cynthia could never be, a voice people lean toward, not away from. The pettiness had been drowned in something far more powerful, belonging. The final note. A neighbor, the same one who chalked, "We've got you" on our driveway, made a sign and stuck it near the clubhouse gate. It said, "In this community, differences aren't hidden, they're honored." I don't know who made it, but I left it there. And no one ever took it down. Fall came quickly. The pool closed for the season, and for the first time since we moved in, I wasn't dreading the quiet. But Cynthia was still lingering like a stubborn shadow. She hadn't spoken publicly since the vote. No apology, no attempt to make amends. Just an uncomfortable silence at the periphery of community events. She stopped attending board meetings, but she'd still be seen watering her lawn at exact intervals, walking her tiny designer dog down the same 3 sidewalks, waving politely like nothing had ever happened. Some folks ignored her. Others gave tight-lipped smiles, but there was no mistaking the shift. She was no longer feared. She was tolerated. And I think that was worse for her. Then came the unexpected. Russell, one of the former board members, reached out to me, sent a short, plain message through the new HOA website's contact form. Subject: acknowledgement. I saw what I didn't want to see. "You were right. I was part of it. If you want to talk, I'm here." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things don't need closure. But that message told me something. The fallout was spreading. Quietly, yes, but it was changing people. One by one, the mechanisms Cynthia had used to enforce her control began to unravel. The couple on Birch Street repainted their shutters bright yellow this time. No one complained. Mr. DeLuca held a yard sale for his classic car memorabilia, and half the neighborhood showed up. The autistic boy, whose mom once got fined for excessive trampoline use, he got a sensory swing installed in their front yard, and Ellie helped him paint it. And the Garden Ellie circle bloomed through the fall, with Mom's ornamental cabbage and thick lavender bushes that seemed to thrive in the cooler air. Kids read books on the bench. People watered the plants when they passed by. Even Maria noticed. "It's like someone pulled the lid off," she said one afternoon. "This place is breathing again." The final bit of fallout, though, came in a strange form. One day, a realtor's sign appeared on Cynthia's lawn. At first, I thought it was a joke. But then came the staging crew, the power washing team, the strategic potted plants. Within 3 weeks, her house was listed. No formal goodbye, no farewell note, just a quiet exit. Someone said she was moving to a condo in another district, a place with a stricter HOA. That made me laugh out loud. Poetic, really. She spent years crafting a perfect little kingdom, only to lose it to the very people she tried to silence. And now even the house didn't want her anymore. When the sale closed, Ellie and I walked past it during our evening stroll. She looked up at the now empty porch and said, "Do you think she ever liked it here?" I thought for a moment, then said I think she liked controlling it. But that's not the same. Ellie nodded. "It's prettier now." It was, and not because Cynthia was gone, because something real had taken root in her absence. Something no one could find, silence, or vote away. Peace didn't return all at once. It came in quiet ways, like morning sunlight creeping in through the blinds, or the slow melt of ice in a glass. You don't notice it immediately, but suddenly it's there. Ellie swam again, daily. Not just practice, not just drills. She swam because she wanted to, because water had become her freedom again, not a battleground. I'd sit poolside in the early evening, the concrete still warm beneath my shoes, and watch her glide through the water like she belonged to it. Maria would wave from the other end, coaching a group of kids. Ellie now helped mentor a few of them wearing hearing aids, one with a cochlear implant, one with a scar from heart surgery. No one stared, no one whispered. The energy had changed. Neighbors greeted each other now. Not in that plastic Stepford way, but real conversation. You'd see them lingering on porches comparing tomatoes in the community garden. Kids riding scooters past houses that used to be silent. I didn't realize how much noise Cynthia had filled the neighborhood with until she was gone. And in that newfound quiet, I started hearing myself again. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a clenched jaw. I didn't check the mailbox in dread. I didn't feel like I had to brace for battle every time I walked outside. Even small things changed. I planted roses, bright, defiantly unapproved roses, right in the front yard where the sun hit strongest. I did it without asking permission, without filing a form. Just planted them. And no one said a word. One afternoon, I found Ellie sitting under the arbor in Ellie's circle, sketching something in her notebook. "What are you drawing?" I asked. She turned the pad toward me. A simple pencil sketch of a girl diving into a pool, arms extended, hearing aids visible like tiny crowns behind each ear. "I think I want to teach swimming full-time," she said, like Maria. My chest tightened, not from sadness, from pride. "That sounds perfect," I said. We sat in silence a while. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. "Do you think I made it worse for you back then?" The question punched me in the heart. I took her hand and said, "Ellie, you didn't make anything worse. You showed people what needed to change, and you made me brave." She smiled, just a little, then said, "I'm glad we stayed." "Me too." Peace doesn't mean the absence of conflict. It means the presence of something stronger. Love, truth, belonging. And I had all three again. The legacy didn't come with a plaque or a grand announcement. It arrived slowly, like roots beneath the surface, quiet, steady, undeniable. It began with the program Ellie and Maria created together. They called it Voices Heard. It started with just 3 kids, then 5, then a dozen. Children with hearing loss, sensory disorders, mobility challenges, all welcome to the community pool once a week for specialized swim sessions. No forms, no judgment, no fees. Just space, real space. Maria volunteered her time. So did Ellie. And soon other neighbors joined. The teenager who used to lifeguard offered to help with coaching. A local retired physical therapist came to assist with adapted techniques. Even the guy who once complained about all the noise from the pool now showed up every Thursday with fresh orange slices in water bottles. We posted a simple sign outside the clubhouse. Voices heard swim sessions. Thursdays at 4 p.m. No silence, no shame, just swim. That phrase stuck. People started printing it on shirts. The HOA newsletter used it as the title for a new section that spotlighted residents doing good. And Ellie, she found her rhythm again. She was asked to speak at a school board meeting about inclusive extracurriculars. She got a write-up in a local magazine, smiling poolside hearing aids shining like medals. She even gave a short TED-style talk at the town's youth empowerment fair. She stood there calm, steady, and said, "I used to think my hearing aids made me different. Now I know they make me visible. And being visible is how we help other people feel seen too." I wasn't the only one crying in the crowd. And me, I went back to my quiet work, but something had changed. I started helping other neighborhoods. A few local HOAs reached out asking for help rewriting their charters, making them more inclusive. I didn't charge a dime. Sometimes revenge isn't destruction. It's reconstruction. Rebuilding what someone tried to rot from within. That's the legacy I wanted, not just a clean house or a silent street, but a place where no one has to shrink to fit. Ellie's circle bloomed year-round. Someone I never found out who hung fairy lights on the arbor. Kids held story time under it during the summer. Seniors sat on the bench and fed the birds. And on the anniversary of the board recall, someone left a small sign stuck in the soil, handwritten in marker. "This is how we win." It was signed a neighbor who used to be afraid. We left it there because it was true. There's something strange about silence when you've lived for so long in its absence. For months, our home was filled with tension, the constant fear of a knock, a notice, a punishment for just existing outside someone else's definition of acceptable. But now in the stillness of a quiet evening, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and realize this is what safety feels like. Not perfection, not control, but the absence of fear. I used to think the fight against people like Cynthia was about winning, but it wasn't. It was about restoring what we all deserve: dignity. The truth is, people like her don't just enforce rules, they enforce shame. They weaponize normalcy and call it order. But the world doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to those brave enough to stand even when their voice trembles. For a long time, I stood for Ellie. Now I watch her stand for others. She's become a symbol in this neighborhood, not because she fought back, but because she never stopped showing up. Because she smiled at the people who once looked past her. Because she made space even when none was given. That's her legacy. Mine. I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through spreadsheets and late-night research. Sometimes it knocks on doors, shares hard truths, and builds coalitions in backyards. And sometimes it just listens. If there's one thing I'd say to anyone out there dealing with a power-drunk HOA board or a bully who's convinced the world bends to their will, it's this: you're not alone. Your voice, no matter how quiet, matters. And with the right people beside you, it can shake the walls of power. Cynthia's house sold. A new family moved in, young couple, 2 kids and a trampoline in the front yard. The kind of joy Cynthia once fined out of existence. And every time I pass by, I smile. Because now this neighborhood finally looks like what we hoped it could be when we moved in. Not perfect, not pristine, but real. And more importantly, it belongs to all of us. It started with a lemon tree. There was an elderly man named Mr. Langley who lived 2 houses down from us. He was in his late 70s with wiry white hair and a bent back that made him look like he was perpetually bowing to the earth. He had lived in the neighborhood since before the HOA existed, back when the streets were cracked and the fences mismatched and no one cared what color you painted your shutters. Every morning he would walk out to his front yard in slippers and tend to his lemon tree. It was huge, easily older than I was, with thick branches and glossy green leaves that shaded his entire porch. He never used pesticides. He didn't own fancy tools, just a rusted watering can and a pocket full of stories. Ellie loved him. She'd stop by after school to help him rake leaves or carry lemons to his porch. He called her kiddo and once told her that his wife used to make the best lemon bars on the planet. Ellie brought him a batch of her own one week, and he cried quietly before hugging her. So when the letter came, it felt like deja vu. A notice from the HOA. The lemon tree had to go. The reason: root encroachment. They claimed it was damaging the sidewalk and posed a trip hazard. Mr. Langley was devastated. They never cared before he told me one morning, voice trembling. That tree's been here longer than some of these houses. I believed him. I'd walked by that tree 100 times and never once noticed a crack or a raised patch of sidewalk. But the letter cited a rule buried deep in the HOA maintenance clause. If he didn't remove the tree within 30 days, the HOA would arrange the removal and fine him for the cost. I offered to help him appeal, but he just shook his head. They want it gone. That's all there is to it. I couldn't let it happen. Not this time. I went down to the clubhouse and requested a copy of the inspection report. What I got was a single photo, blurry, badly lit, showing a slight curve in the sidewalk that could have been anything from tree roots to ground settling. It was flimsy, and I could prove it. I called a local arborist and asked for a professional assessment. When she arrived, she walked the area, took soil samples, and examined the roots. Her verdict was clear. The tree was healthy, the roots were stable, and any sidewalk lift was negligible and well within city code. I submitted the report to the board. Their response: "We are maintaining community safety and aesthetic standards." The report does not override board discretion. So I called the city. Turns out the sidewalk was technically public property maintained by the municipality, not the HOA. I filed a request for a city inspector to evaluate the site. A week later, he came by, took his own measurements, and left a note on Mr. Langley's door. No action required. Tree does not violate city ordinance. I sent a copy of that letter to the board. Still, they held firm. So I changed tactics. I posted on the neighborhood forum telling Mr. Langley's story. I didn't use outrage or accusation. I just shared who he was: a veteran, a widower, a kind man with a lemon tree that had stood through marriages, births, and loss. The response was overwhelming. People shared stories, photos. One neighbor posted a picture of her son picking lemons with Mr. Langley as a toddler. Another remembered getting free lemonade from his porch every summer. A young woman wrote, "He was the only one who spoke to me when I moved here alone. That tree is the first thing that made me feel safe." Within days, a petition circulated. Over 100 signatures. The board didn't respond at first. Then they posted a statement on the bulletin board, carefully worded, but cold. The board remains committed to maintaining neighborhood standards and will proceed accordingly. But public pressure has a way of unraveling silence. The day before the removal deadline, a group of neighbors gathered around Mr. Langley's yard. No protest signs, no shouting, just folding chairs, lemonade, and conversations. By dusk, there were 20 people. By morning, 40. Maria brought folding tables and cookies. Ellie passed out homemade lemon bars. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker and played soft music under the branches. We called it Lemon Day. That evening, a local journalist came by. A neighbor had tipped her off. She interviewed Mr. Langley, who told her the story in his quiet, gravelly voice. She interviewed Ellie, too. The story went live online the next morning: lemon tree standoff in suburbia. When rules forget the roots. That afternoon, the board rescinded the order. No explanation, no apology, just a short line in the email bulletin. The board has chosen not to pursue removal of the tree at this time. Mr. Langley didn't say much. He just sat on his porch, peeling a lemon with a pocket knife, watching kids run beneath the branches. He nodded at me once, and that was enough. Later, Ellie carved a tiny plaque and nailed it to the base of the tree. Mrs. Langley's lemon tree, planted in love, protected in truth. That tree still stands. And now every spring, the neighborhood hosts Lemon Day. Not because it's required, but because it reminds us that a community is only as strong as the people it chooses to protect. And no HOA bylaw can compete with that.